Chapter 59, Upon the Field. Upon the field. From empty dreams of her deserted plain, Fritha awoke to a moment of disorientation until her eyes found the head of dark chestnut waves a few yards from her. Milky light was filtering through the closed shutters, opening the whitewashed walls in sickly grey. Imoen was curled upon the cot next to hers just as she had been when Fritha had dragged herself to bed late the night before, eyes sore from wood smoke and lack of sleep. The scent clung to her clothes as she pulled on her tunic, Fritha feeling her eyelids close in that warm, linen cavern. The yielding pillow was luring her back, the desire for sleep overwhelming, and it took a monumental force of will to pull the tunic over her head and emerge blinking again in the pale light. The rest of her clothes pulled on and hair combed through, Fritha stumbled, at last, into the silent kitchen. The water pump at the sink allowed for a bracing wash of her face and hands, and she was just settling at the table with a bowl of the porridge someone had left over the hearth when Solafane stepped through the front door. He looked tense, his white hair tied hastily back and clothes thrown on in a mirror of herself, those grey eyes fluttering slightly as they found her. "Morning," she murmured hoarsely. He did not bother returning the greeting, slipping into the seat next to her. "Fritha, have you been outside yet?" "No. Balthazar's forces have arrived, I suppose." Solafane merely nodded, and for a moment, only the listless chime of her spoon against the bowl broke the silence. Their hopes of reinforcements arriving in time were fading. "How many men?" she asked eventually, when the idea of another spoonful of congealed porridge became more unappetizing than the question. "From the number of tents and horses, I would say between 150 and 200. At worst we will be outnumbered by 50 men, though of their skill." Solafane trailed off, unwilling to point out that even only 100 elite troops would have had little trouble in a stand-up fight with their untrained forces. "They brought no siege weapons though," the drow added. "I suppose they did not imagine they would need them attacking a village." Fritha allowed herself a slight smile, proud of Imoen's handiwork and what they had all accomplished in her absence whatever happened that day. The bowl rattled as she pushed it away on the pitted tabletop. She could have eaten more, but what little hunger she had felt was sated, and she had never liked porridge. "Do you wish to see for yourself?" continued Solafane. "The others are outside already and assigning tasks to our forces. Jahara believes it is best to keep them occupied and leave less room for fears to grow." Fritha shook her head and leaned forward to rest her forehead upon her folded arms. Her stomach felt full, the weariness she fought past to escape her bed had caught up with her. "I should wait for Imoen," she yawned into the table, unable to help but stared at his hand on her back, the sudden contact catching her off guard in that instant of unfocused vulnerability, though she was eased as he began to rub in smooth circles. "You wish to return to bed?" "No," she sighed, closing her eyes to lose herself in the sensation of his hand. "I am fine here." A clattered slam she felt all through her forehead, and Fritha jerked awake to find Imoen sending her a sheepish smile from the other end of the table, porridge flecked about the bowl she had just dropped onto the surface. "Sorry," the girl grinned, setting down her teacup with far more care and sinking into a chair. "My cup was hot and I needed to swap hands." Fritha forgave her with another yawn, the three talking of nothing as Imoen ate, and Fritha was glad when they finally stepped outside, the rush of cool morning air sweeping away the lingering cobwebs. It was as Solafane had said, the camp a hive of activity as men and women made the last checks of the defenses and improved the barricades. Many stopped as they saw them pass, a myriad of salutes thrown up by those who had never given them before. Imoen nodded to each, but there was no time to pause and bolster any confidences just then. Fritha could see them as they left the village proper, her group gathered before the wall besides the gates, Minsk and Valigar already standing upon the short section of scaffolding someone had hastily erected beside it, while Jahara barked orders to those about her. There was no sign of Inomen though, he was likely organizing the clerics.
Report,
demanded Imoen, for the benefit of those about them. Jahara nodded south to the expanse of trees that seemed to loom ever in darkness.
They came from the south, using the shadow of the Apogis, before cutting across to make camp to the east. The perimeter guards said they began to arrive just before the pre-dawn, though I saw little point in waking you.
Jahara gestured to the scaffold next to them.
See for yourself.
Imoen was first to ascend the rough wooden steps of the scaffold, Fritha following to watch the eastern plains rise slowly into view. The dawn had risen on scores of dun canvas tents, their peaks corrugating the plains east, far out of reach of any bow or spell. Even their camp seemed larger than the village. Fritha heard the same hopelessness she felt in the voice beside her.
What in hells are we going to do?
Murmured Imoen.
We could likely hold out for a 10-day before supplies ran out, offered Valigar. Farn or the chalice could still arrive in time, something Balthazar likely knows as well.
Imoen made no answer, unless her sigh was to be counted. Fritha narrowed her eyes as the early sunlight caught on the coruscating, dew-speckled sprawl. There was still a chance, however slim, that the monk would see reason.
First, we will talk. Minsk, follow me and bring your bow, I will need someone to send the mess.
Look, shouted Imoen, Fritha whipping back to take in the scene the girl was describing for those below.
A rider from their camp, they're carrying a flag. So they wish to parley, as well,
confirmed Jahara. Valigar followed the streaming white banner with a scowl.
What is Balthazar up to?
Fritha shrugged inwardly and continued her descent.
There is only one way to find out. No,
cut in Jahara, pushing past Valigar and Imoen to catch her.
I will go with Minsk to arrange this, it could be a trap.
Solafane had taken Minsk's place on the scaffold, therefore watching the pair leave the gates, diminishing across the plains until they were no more than dark shapes against the fresh green grasslands. The outrider's horse was flighty and wanted more of a ride than its task required, the beast pawing and fidgeting as its rider spoke to the two newcomers. A half-hour later and the mount was at last being given the ride it wanted, its thundering passage kicking up a hail of dirt as it was charged back to its camp, while Minsk and Jahara had stepped into the shadow of the walls once more. Fritha was at the gate to meet them.
It is arranged, announced Jahara for the small crowd who had gathered. Fritha, you can bring 2 others and so can Balthazar, you will meet at where we agreed it, beyond the reach of any arrow or spell in a half-hour's time. Balthazar's men are setting up an awning now.
Fine, Fritha nodded.
Solafane, Jahara.
Wait! Cried Imoen, torn between indignation and worry at being left behind, and both died resignedly as Fritha shook her head.
You need to stay here, Imoen.
Imoen sighed and nodded.
I know. Be careful.
Time seemed to race by, Fritha returning to the house to swap her sandals for her boots, discard her hat and try to make herself look at least a little more martial before she was back at the gates, Jaland nodding his respect as he and 4 others heaved them ajar. The sun was well past the horizon now, the light warm and pleasant against her face. A breeze was stirring through the curls at her temples, drying the dew-soaked grass. It still held the chill of night, though it would not last, not from the cloudless blue sky that arced over them, it would grow into a fine day. No one spoke as they walked. In her peripherals she could tell Jahara was frowning, Solafane wearing the same unreadable expression he always wore outside of those who knew him well. It did not waver as he noticed her glance to him, though she could not mistake the brush of fingers at her wrist. A flutter in her chest and she returned her attention to the plain canvas awning that grew ever closer. She really should have let him take her east. Balthazar was there already, seated on a chair that looked as though it folded smaller for travel, a large warrior-enrobed male with a shaved head, a monk or mage, she was not sure, standing either side of him. Balthazar himself looked much the same, wiry, little taller than she and older by almost a decade. His skin was darker from life outside the monastery, camouflaging the tattoos upon his shaved skull, and, in her stomach, his presence awoke not the usual worry, but a sudden draw. She could feel the essence they held clamoring to be reunited, though if the monk felt the same he did not show it, merely nodding as she took the chair that had been set opposite. Balthazar smiled, there was no welcome in it.
I am surprised you actually attended, negotiation is not the children's way.
Frithus snorted. His pious cruelty, born of a misplaced wisdom, irked more than Abizigal's arrogance or Sendai's tyranny.
Well, that is merely one of many misconceptions you hold about our kin, or did you think you were the only one who could fight the taint? No, but I am the only one who can purge it from this land, of this I am certain.
Imoen narrowed her eyes, a hand raised against the eastern glare as she tried to make out the air of their discussion from the interplay of two irregular dark outlines beneath the distant awning. She wished Fritha had not seen fit to take the two with the best eyesight with her. Valigar and Minsk were standing on either side and watched in equal futility, it seemed, from their occasional sighs, the sounds coming strange from such imposing figures. At the gates below, quite the crowd had gathered. It was like a uniform, each was wearing the same mismatched armor with weapons that looked decades older than the current styles, 46 voices all muttering over the same questions.
What are they doing? Are they still talking? Maybe they'll come to an agreement. Maybe we won't have to fight at all.
Imoen fought a wince and kept her eyes on the plains. Perhaps this was why Balthazar called for a parley, nothing eroded a resolved heart like hope. Balthazar was ramrod straight, his shoulders making no contact with the back of his chair, the man imbued with the blazing righteousness of his words. Fritha reclined slightly and leveled him with an even gaze.
It is not a taint that requires purging, given time all the children can be allowed to die a natural death, with no more danger to Faerun than presented by any of her peoples. You are mistaken, he retorted. As they die, as we die, the essence will slowly collect at the throne, until Baal rises again or, worse still, another moves to take his place, and vengeance will be released upon this land. The throne could not be taken by Baal or any other if it had already been claimed,
countered Fritha. Balthazar swelled with the predicted outrage.
I thought I had you understood, but you are just as the others, hungry for a power that is not your own. I do not desire the throne, Balthazar, but I will take it if it will spare the others. So you can rise as murder reborn.
He demmed her.
No. There is a prophecy, one strong enough can take the power, bend it to their will. I would be a god, but I need not be evil. I was chosen for this.
But Balthazar merely sighed, a look of frowned resignation spared for the monk at his side.
You may believe you can tame the power, but I have no such faith. You will be consumed whatever your noble intentions. Do you realize the horror your mercy would bring upon this land?
It was Fritha's turn to swell.
And do you realize the horror your blindness is causing? The attacks you've already committed, the war you plan? And have you forgotten Melisande? At every step, all she has had to do is sit back and watch the children kill each other, while she awaits the throne. If we fight now and one of us dies, Melisande is no threat,
snapped Balthazar, seemingly angry at her name. Perhaps her previous deception still stung.
She would need the essence from both of us to ascend. After I have removed you and your sister, Imoen, I will take my fight to Tethur and purge all those of our tainted blood from the face of Faerun. And then what?
Demanded Fritha.
You and Melisande will have to battle over the throne and one of you will have to take it, or Bal will return. Not so.
Balthazar was smiling again, slight and smug.
Did you really believe me to be so short-sighted? Once all the essence has been gathered at the throne, I have no plans to take it, but destroy it. I know of your history, Fritha, daughter of the Twin Temples. But I, too, was chosen and not by Balites and their associated evils. I have been raised from birth to be the instrument of this world's salvation. The Brotherhood of Uljit has, since the time of troubles, been devoted to this end. And when the time came, and Bal's foul seeds began to grow, our monastery went out and sought a child to raise in power that he may be the final sacrifice to end Bal's taint upon this land. When all other children are defeated and the essence is gathered for me, I will, within the rituals devised by Master Uljit so many decades ago, take my own life. And Bal's essence would die with you.
Fritha breathed. He seemed pleased by her awe.
Exactly. You see now it is the only way to assure that Bal is not resurrected. Melisande could still be a problem.
She murmured distractedly, not with any dissent to his plans, but with a blossoming feeling of their potential. Beside her, the others had tensed.
If she killed you before the ritual or enough of the essence had been collected by your slaughter of the children.
Fritha straightened.
I have a proposal, Balthazar. Join with me. We can seek out Melisande and remove her threat. Once she is defeated, we can take our own lives together.
Solifane had gripped the back of her chair, and she could feel his anger trembling all through her shoulders.
And the other children?
Considered Balthazar.
Imoen. Left to live out their lives as they are,
she answered firmly.
With our essence combined with what is already collected and then destroyed, there would not be enough left in those surviving children to raise Bal or anything else. We can avoid this war, Balthazar.
She pressed, almost pleading.
All these needless deaths.
He drew back with a scoff.
We will defeat Melisande and you will merely betray me afterwards, allowing me to take my own life, while you take the throne. No, I swear it.
Fritha cried, leaning forward and wanting nothing more than to reach out and grab him, to force him to agree.
All I strive for, all I have ever strived for is to see Bal dead.
Balthazar watched her, something about his face closing as though he wanted to give nothing away.
If that is so, daughter, then there is a simple way to end this.
Fritha drew back, hearing the intimation behind that benign smile. It took all her will to force her voice louder than a squeak.
You mean?
He met her gaze with serene dark eyes.
Surrender to me now, and I will spare the rest.
She faltered, her face burning in her sudden reluctance.
Just me? Everyone else can go free. Well, no,
the monk conceded.
As I said, the other children will have to surrender, as will your Imoen.
Fritha felt heartily ashamed of her flooding relief.
Then you know my answer. You have your offer, Balthazar, the others are to be spared and I will take my own life with you after we have destroyed Melisande. If you do not trust me to be my own end, the answer is simple, my friends will supervise you, and your monks can supervise me.
At her side, the drowse will finally snapped.
I will not stand by. Solifane. Do we have an agreement?
A long sigh, Balthazar avoiding her eyes as he drew away, his shoulders finally meeting the back of the chair, and in that moment he looked exhausted.
No, there is only one way. But if you wish to spare those within your walls who are untainted, send them out now and they will be unharmed.
The desire to grab him was still there, but now accompanied by the burning need to crush his sinewy throat and watch as his life left those cold, soulless eyes. Fritha curbed her murderous intent to spit at his feet.
We are none of us tainted, and I will not condemn a single man to the sword for your delusions. You will destroy as much of this land saving it, as Baal would in his vengeance. You are as corrupted as any of the five, and you are wrong. I am chosen. Not by Baal or the fates or even the gods. But by me.
The chair overturned to the grass with a soft thud, Fritha already turned and stalking out into the sun-drenched plains.
I chose, and I will end this.
The crowds at the gate parted before Fritha, their wary muttering like the buzz of a hornet's nest as she stalked through, Jahara and Solafane at her heels.
Fritha!
Imoen was hurrying to halt her, the girl dropping from the scaffold steps at about halfway down, and the crowd split again to let her pass.
Fritha, what happened? The talks failed,
she snapped, her voice carrying clear across the throng.
I offered everything I could, my own surrender, an alliance to take Melisande, he will accept nothing but our total destruction.
Imoen raised her fist to this challenge.
Then we fight.
The roar about them was deafening. In any other circumstances, Fritha would have felt hardened. In the commotion, Imoen had let her facade of the general drop, her frown making no disguise of her worries.
Fritha, is something?
Fritha could not let her finish.
Imoen, I'm sorry, but I need to, the others can tell you the rest.
And she left Jahara there, the crowds remaining to watch the two women's exchange, and the village seemed almost deserted by comparison, the man who had refused to be so easily dismissed still dogging her passage.
Fritha! Orndas, Fritha! What?
She snapped, the instant to whirl and taking in that solemn face all she needed to calm her. A rueful sigh.
What is it, Sola? When you swore to Balthazar just now, that you would take your life with him, you were lying, were you not? You would not have, Fritha.
He demanded as she made to continue their path.
It hardly matters now, he said no. But Fritha.
Her cry seemed all the louder as she stalked into the sudden confines of the kitchen.
But what, Solafane? Either way I am gone.
Another sigh, the girl collapsing into the nearest chair, Imoen's empty porridge bowl still on the table before her.
I mean, at least that way Baal really couldn't have come back. All these people wouldn't have had to die. They are not dead yet,
Solafane challenged,
and neither are you. You need to fight this, until the very end, not surrender to death on the whim of some monk. Perhaps,
she conceded,
but we have our fight now, and when we face him, it will be a slaughter and we both know it. Just as we both heard what Balthazar said about letting the untainted go free unharmed.
Fritha dropped her chin to her cupped hands.
Half the people in here aren't Baalspawn. They came here to fight of their own free will,
Solafane reminded, trying to catch her eye.
Yes, and they'll stay and die, because I won't be telling them they have another choice.
She could not see his face, but she could hear the incredulity in his tone.
Is this what is upsetting you? You feel guilty that you will not allow half our troops to desert? Fritha, it may seem cruel, but we can do no else lest we doom us all. Maybe.
She faltered, embarrassed to admit it, but when it seemed Balthazar was offering all their lives in exchange for her own, she had been afraid, she had wanted him to refuse her. It was not dying that frightened her, so much as the finality of it. With taking the throne, or even this suicide pact, there was always a chance. It was in the future, distant and unrealized. Something could change in the meantime, something. Her thoughts spiraled away from her. Foolish girl, so close to the end and still she clung to hope.
Fritha.
Cellophane had sunk onto the bench beside her. The man stooped and searching her face in vain. She sent him a weak smile, easing herself up again, and he followed her the few short steps to the parlor where she had awoken mere hours before. The cool grey space was drawing her back to that familiar cot. A hand groped behind to give the drow a reassuring pat on the arm.
I'm sorry, Sola, I know I'm not making sense. I'm going to get some sleep, just to clear my head. Will you wake me in a couple of hours?
He sighed, his disappointment at her cool dismissal evident even as he nodded, his words drowned out in the creak of the closing door.
Of course. Sleep well.
Dusty light was filtering through the shutters, a soft yellow sliver between each wooden slat. Fritha let her eyes focus upon it, while the sounds of the house coalesced about her as she slowly awoke. The village outside seemed quieter than it should, that and the frail light leaving her to conclude it was much later in the day than she had wanted to wake. In the kitchen next door, she could hear the murmur of voices. Cocooned there in her blankets, the world outside seemed far colder than it likely was, and for a time, she just lay there, listening and trying not to dwell on any thought over long. It was no use though, and a quarter hour later saw her braving the cold to open the door to the kitchen. The contrast to the blue-grey silence she had just left could not have been more pronounced. Steam poured from the pot that was bubbling over the hearth, hanging in golden clouds in the lamplight to give the air the humid warmth of somewhere far more exotic. All but Jahara were seated about the large scrubbed table, the druid instead stooped over the hearth and tending a cauldron of bubbling stock. Those seated were hardly idle, Cellophane and Minsk making themselves useful chopping vegetables, while a no-man worked similarly on a leg of cured pork. Imoen was on her feet before her chair and just setting down the pot from where she had poured out a round of tea for everyone, the girl passing a cup to Valigar before glancing back to be the first to note her.
Fritha, you're awake. I tried to wake you at noon as you asked,
Cellophane hastened,
but you were reluctant to be roused.
He shifted slightly to make room on the bench next to him and Fritha took a seat with a nod. She vaguely recalled stirring at one point to Cellophane's face and felt a mild prickle of irritation that he had not persevered in waking her, but she let it subside. He never was one to press her in anything, even if it was for her own good.
We only just got together ourselves,
continued Imoen, pouring her a cup of tea from the waiting pot.
Most of us were running drills, and Jahara was overseeing the build of more scaffolds at the wall and securing the new gate. We were discussing tactics for when Balthazar makes his move,
provided Valigar succinctly.
How many days before Farn or the Silver Chalice has a chance of reaching us?
Asked Fritha. A no-man drew a sip of tea and shrugged evenly.
Depending on how far east they had managed to get, another 4 at least. Large forces can only travel as quickly as their slowest members. Something of which Balthazar must be aware,
added Valigar,
even if he believes we only sent for reinforcements once our outriders reported back with news of his advance. He will attack,
concluded Minsk grimly. At his side, Jahara heaved a sigh and nodded.
Indeed, and soon, the longer Balthazar delays, better chance that reinforcements will arrive to rout him. But with a wall about Al-Hali now, we will not be the easy target he likely assumed he would be facing,
added Cellophane.
We need to use the wall's young Imoen summoned to our gain,
agreed Minsk, making a line of 4 chopped carrot discs on the table before him.
As much as we must keep his forces out, Balthazar must strive to get in. If he has mages in his number, he could try to break a hole in them.
He removed a piece from the carrot wall.
Balthazar would then order his forces to rush the breach. If they did breach the walls,
continued Jahara from the hearth,
it would be up to Imoen and our archers to concentrate their fire there to hold as many outside as possible, while our ground forces dealt with any who had made it inside. We would fight to hold the walls for as long as possible. Balthazar would likely use the breach as a distraction to try and get his forces over somewhere else along the walls.
Jahara scooped Minsk's wall into rest of the carrots he had chopped and dumped her brimming handfuls into the pot. Minsk looked disappointed, a nomen taking up the tale.
The only other way for Balthazar's forces to get inside would be to scale the walls. I do not know if they will have brought siege ladders, but with the proximity of the Apogis, it would not be unreasonable for them to make some. Such an attack would be more scattered,
continued Valigar,
and likely hit on all sides. The people here have built another 8 scaffolds about the walls to act as towers for the archers. Those points of attack, combined with the combustibles we have thrown into the ditch outside, should work together to keep enemy forces from scaling the walls with any ease.
Jahara gave the stew another dose of pepper and added the sliced meat offering.
If his forces get past the walls in any numbers though, then our only choice will be to pull back the main body of our troops to the village. We will divide our forces among the first barricades, then the second, but if the fighting falls back to Al-Hali, it is doubtful we will last long. We have a hidden cellar prepared in one of the houses for those who will not be part of the fighting to retreat to should the worst happen. It contains enough food and water to see them through until reinforcements arrive, as long as it remains undiscovered. Imoen can collapse part of the walls to allow the rest of our troops to break for the Apogis and, of course, we have already decided on a contingency plan to assure your escape.
It took Fritha a moment to realize this last line had been delivered to her.
Sorry.
Imoen straightened imperceptibly, readying herself for the expected protests.
Jahara and me discussed it earlier, then we put it to the others, we all agree. If Balthazar needs to kill you, then it stands you need to survive.
Imoen sighed, something about her expression softening as she admitted,
I know I'm not the one who can end this, Fritha. If Al-Hali is lost, then our priority needs to be to get you out alive.
Fritha could barely get the words out in that overwhelming sense of betrayal.
Are you? No. I will not.
Imoen's hand hit the table in a rattle of cups.
Am I in charge, or not? Enough of us have had to stand by and watch you go off into danger for the greater good.
She breathed a deep sigh, adding almost apologetically,
I know it's not how you want this, Fritha, but you know we're right.
Around the table, her friends were all gazing back at her with unrelenting frowns. Fritha dropped her attention to her cup.
Fine. But with any luck, it will not come to that,
continued Jahara briskly, at last adding the meat to put the lid onto the pot and settling to take up her tea,
and we can remove Balthazar before Al-Hali is in any danger. Do you have a plan for that as well?
Asked Fritha, trying to keep the bitter edge from the question. She did not quite manage, but to her credit, Jahara pretended not to notice.
Indeed. At the moment, Balthazar will be wary of an attack and at full strength in the heart of his camp. We will need to wait until his guard has dropped somewhat. I believe our best chance will come after we have managed to blunt their first assault. In the retreat of their forces, a few of our group can intermingle with the regrouping troops and return to their camp. Once there, I believe it will be possible to assassinate Balthazar before the camp at large is alerted to what is happening.
Fritha let a doubtful frown travel the rather eclectic group of individuals about her.
So who's going to go? Because outside of a nomen, the rest of you kind of stand out. Don't worry, I've got that covered,
trilled Imoen.
I've been working on a glamour charm to disguise those we send. I used it on Solafane back in Jera. To limited success,
the drow reminded. Imoen shot him a sulky glare.
I've worked on it since then, it's fine now. So what do you think?
Asked Inomen.
Will the fates be satisfied? Our last assassination attempt did not end so well.
Fritha could not quite hold back the hollow laugh.
Your guess is as good as mine there. I suppose the only reason our attempt on Sendai failed was because I started the distraction early.
Yes, agreed Jahara dryly,
that is one way to describe slitting a guard's throat through a tent canvas.
Fritha snorted, amused in spite of herself at the gruesome memory, though it faded as her eyes fell upon Solafane and the scars she knew had been the cost of such compelling rage. If he had read her thoughts, she could not tell, but he noted her glance to him all the same, and a hand closed about hers beneath the table. They discussed tactics and plans for what seemed to be every possible contingency all through dinner. Fritha added what she could, as did Imoen, but their skills did not lie there. Solafane, too, was at more of a disadvantage. The battles of the Drow were much less direct affairs. The dishes were cleared and draining in the sink by now, but the talk was still going strong. Imoen had retired a short while ago, wanting some quiet time to do more study into her latest illusion magics before she slept. And Fritha, too, had eventually grown tired of a conversation into which she had little input, the girl slipping off upstairs to take the ladder to the roof. The stars were out, hidden behind a gauzy veil of clouds, while across Al-Hali cooking fires burned in the yards, and lamplight glowed from every window to cast the silent streets in gold. It was peaceful, eerily so when she shifted her gaze to beyond the walls and the collection of torches that hung, pinpricks of light, in the vast darkness of the plains. There was a shimmer to the air over that way, as well, a current that seemed to blur across the torchlight. Someone had gone to the effort to cast a paling. Perhaps Balthazar had heard of Imoen's fondness for explosive displays of raw magic. A surge of the familiar hatred, and for an instant she saw it, the sky above those distant lights sundered and the hellish denizens from some other plane pouring through to slaughter all who would bring war to those who wished only to exist in peace. Fritha jumped as something landed on her shoulders, starting around to find Solafane just behind, his hands already raised in apology.
I am sorry, I thought you would have heard me, you looked cold.
She shrugged, but made no move to remove the cloak he had placed about her, the faded yellow wool warm and redolent with wood smoke and the musky, almost spicy scent that was his alone. He took the space next to her, their legs just touching.
Are you ready to tell me what was upsetting you earlier? Nothing, she sighed. I was just afraid. Of the battle? Of what must come? No.
She trailed off, not knowing how to put into words her fears. In the silence, she gazed out on the village of people who would fight tomorrow, would possibly fall. It had always seemed like she was protecting them, but if plans were in place to see her safely away while the rest of Al-Hali fell, then perhaps it was other way round.
Did you know, Sola, there are 2 statues of me in the north? Well, only one really, in Trade Meet, in the central square. The other is in Athkatla, in the Temple of Helm, though that one is not officially me, but the likeness, especially of my temper, is undeniable. When all this is over I'd like for you to visit them. Return north with Inomen and the others. No.
She forestalled at the breath he sharply drew.
I know you don't need anyone's protection, but please, for me, stay in Athkatla for a while. I don't mind with who. Let them show you my theatre and the coronet, the taverns where we danced and the streets where we fought. And if Imoen is able, let her take you back to Candlekeep and meet with the people there, and tell them.
She faltered, trying to swallow past the hot lump in her throat, his arm snaking instinctively about the small of her back.
Tell them you were my best. I just want you to get a better picture of the whole that I didn't have time to give you. No one down here knows me outside of a name and threats of dragons, and those back north only have half of it, too. But if you, who knows me best, can learn how I was, then you will know me. I think I need to know that. I need to know someone will remember me just as I was.
Fritha, Solifane sighed, the arm about her tightening.
I will carry you with me until the end of days.
She leaned into the embrace, dropping her forehead to his shoulder with a miserable groan.
Oh, I missed you. Part of me didn't even want to see you again after I left for the keep, because I knew how much harder it would be. But you are here now,
he pressed, his free hand encircling one of hers,
and we are reunited for the last time. Is there anything further we could do to make this more painful?
Sola, she sighed, her voice coming hoarse in the welling tears,
there isn't enough time left.
He took the tears from her cheek with light fingers.
We could have been given 10 lifetimes, and there still never would have been. Ah, Sola,
she laughed wetly, a sleeve mopped across her cheeks even as more tears fell.
You're going to break some girl's heart one day. No,
he smiled,
just my own.
She felt torn, the compulsion to pull away fluttering in her chest, and his hand on her back took on an insistent pressure as she made to attempt it, an animalistic thrill trembling through her stomach. Her eyes closed. The instant hung, timeless, as his mouth hovered just before hers and then the distance was closed. A tremor all through her abdomen, his tongue darting past her lips to send a frisson down her spine. Hands were sweeping up her back to entwine within that wealth of copper curls, her own grasping his tunic and pulling him closer, and when they parted they were breathless. Her eyes still closed, she laid her head upon his shoulder and they remained so for a while, Fritha feeling complete in the rise and fall of the chest that moved in unison with her own. The crackle of parchment broke the mood as Solifane shifted to fish a small packet from his pocket, a dust she recognized still clinging to the string, the powder a bright, earthy red against his palm, henna.
I bought this from one of the traders,
he explained with a smile.
What do you think? Will prayers of love and hymns of affection be worthy for one who will soon ascend to the divinity in which I have always held her?
Her ripple of laughter held a deep melancholy, her arms tightening about his chest and pressing herself to him as though her will alone could keep them from parting.
How will I ever be without you?
He leaned in again and this time she did not pull back, his breath hot against her parted lips.
You will never be without me.
End of chapter.